I was a NASA technician cleaning Apollo archives until I saw the photos they tried to erase. True story. Before I start, I need you to do something for me. Leave a comment right now telling me where you're listening from. Your bedroom, your car, walking your dog, hiding under your blankets with headphones on. I don't care where. Just let me know. Because in 72 hours, there's a very real chance this recording will be scrubbed from every platform it's on, and I'll be gone. Not dead, probably. Just gone. Disappeared into some facility where the sun doesn't reach and questions don't get answered. So if this vanishes, at least I'll know that someone, somewhere, heard what I'm about to tell you. That someone knows the truth about what's really in those Apollo 11 photographs. The ones they've been editing for 50 years. My name is Marcus Webb, and as I'm recording this, I'm sitting in a Motel 6 outside of Roswell, New Mexico. Yes, I know how that sounds. Trust me, the irony isn't lost on me either. 3 days ago, I was a nobody, a mid-level archive technician at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, living a quiet life, doing boring work, going home to my cat and my microwave dinners. I had a security clearance, sure, but nothing sexy. I wasn't analyzing Mars rover data or calculating trajectories for deep space missions. I was digitizing old photographs, scanning negatives, cataloging dust. It was the kind of job where your biggest daily decision was whether to get coffee from the break room or the vending machine. But last Monday, I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. And now there are 2 men in a black Suburban parked 4 spaces down from my room, watching my door, waiting for me to make a move. They've been following me since I left Houston yesterday morning. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. That's how I know I'm running out of time. When they stop pretending, it means they're getting ready to act. The deal they offered me, and yeah, there was a deal, expires in 72 hours. After that, all bets are off. After that, I stop being a problem they can pay to go away, and I become a problem they need to make go away. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I'm not crazy. I'm not some conspiracy nut who thinks the moon landing was faked or that lizard people run the government. I voted. I pay my taxes. I believe in science, in evidence, in peer review. I served 8 years in the United States Air Force as a communications specialist before I ever set foot in NASA. I've held a top-secret clearance since I was 23 years old. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that I'm the last person who would believe what I'm about to tell you, which is exactly why they gave me the job in the first place. They needed someone trustworthy, someone detail-oriented, someone who wouldn't ask questions, someone like me. 3 weeks ago, my supervisor called me into his office and gave me a special assignment. There was a batch of Apollo 11 negatives that had been sitting in deep storage since 1969. Original film, never fully catalogued, never properly digitized. With the 50th anniversary having just passed, NASA wanted everything archived, searchable, preserved for history. It was going to be my project, solo work, after hours in a secure room in the basement of Building 30. At the time, I thought I'd won the lottery. Overtime pay, quiet workspace, handling literal pieces of history with my own hands. I remember calling my mum that night, excited, telling her I was going to be working with the actual Apollo 11 photos. She was so proud. I started the project 3 weeks ago. For the first 2 weeks, everything was exactly what you'd expect. I'd show up at 6 p.m. after the day shift cleared out, swipe into the archive room, and spend 4 hours scanning negatives, pictures of the lunar module, Armstrong's boot print, the flag, Buzz Aldrin's gold visor reflecting the desolate lunar surface. Some of them were duplicates of images I'd seen in textbooks and documentaries my whole life. Others were similar shots from slightly different angles, the kind of thing they took dozens of just to make sure they got at least one good frame. It was tedious work, honestly, methodical, peaceful. I'd put on a podcast, lose myself in the rhythm of it, scan, catalog, upload, repeat. I felt like I was doing something important, preserving history, making sure these images would outlive all of us. Then last Friday night, I found the envelope. It was misfiled, tucked behind a drawer divider in a cabinet that was supposed to only contain Apollo 12 materials. Manila, standard government issue, but old. The kind of old where the paper has gone yellow and soft at the edges. Someone had written on it in black Sharpie, all caps, AP11, MISC confidential. No date, no filing number, no barcode. In 3 years of working NASA archives, I'd never seen anything catalogued like that. Everything has a number, everything has a digital trail. But this envelope, it was like it didn't officially exist. And inside were 23 photographic negatives that should have been impossible. I'm going to tell you exactly what I saw on those negatives. I'm going to walk you through every detail, every metadata file, every horrifying implication. But first, I need you to understand something. After I scanned those photos, after I compared them to the public versions, after I found the handwritten note at the bottom of that envelope, I made copies. Multiple copies. Cloud storage with dead man switches, encrypted thumb drives hidden in 3 different states, a package mailed to my lawyer with instructions not to open unless I disappear, because I knew the moment I saw what they'd erased from those photos that my life had just become very, very complicated. The men in the Suburban aren't here to kill me. At least, I don't think they are. They're here to make sure I get on a plane tomorrow morning. They're here to make sure I accept the transfer to a facility in the New Mexico desert that doesn't appear on any map. They're here to make sure I take the money, sign the new NDA, and spend the rest of my career in an underground bunker working on God knows what. And you know what the worst part is? Part of me wants to take the deal. Part of me wants to forget everything I saw, cash the checks, and live out my life in comfortable silence. But I can't. Because what they found on the moon in 1969, what they've been hiding in plain sight for 50 years, changes everything, and you deserve to know. So here it is, everything, before they make me disappear, before the scrubbers find this video and wipe it from existence, before I lose my nerve and delete it myself. This is what really happened when Apollo 11 landed on the moon. This is what NASA has been editing out of the photographs for half a century. And this is why, in 72 hours, I'll either be in a bunker in New Mexico, or I'll be dead. I know what you're thinking. Why should you believe me? Why should you trust some random guy recording a confession in a cheap motel room, claiming NASA has been hiding alien structures on the moon for 50 years? Fair question. If I were you, I'd be skeptical too. So let me tell you exactly who I am, and more importantly, let me tell you why I was the perfect person for them to trust with those archives. Because that's the thing, they chose me specifically, they vetted me, they looked at my entire life and decided I was safe, loyal, controllable. And they were right, up until the moment they weren't. My name is Marcus Andrew Webb. I was born in Tyler, Texas in 1984. My father was a mechanic for American Airlines. My mother was a third-grade teacher. I grew up in a house where we said grace before dinner, and the flag in our front yard got replaced the moment it showed anywhere. I wasn't rich, wasn't poor, just normal. The kind of American kid who grew up thinking astronauts were the closest thing to superheroes that actually existed. I had posters of the space shuttle on my bedroom wall. I did a school report on Sally Ride in 5th grade. When the Columbia disaster happened in 2003, I was a senior in high school, and I remember watching the news coverage and feeling like I'd lost family members I'd never met. Space wasn't just cool to me, it was sacred. I enlisted in the Air Force 3 months after graduation. Not because I had to, my grades were good enough for college, but because I wanted to serve. I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. They put me through tech school at Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi, trained me as a ground radio communications specialist. For 8 years, I maintained encrypted communication systems, handled classified message traffic, worked on equipment that kept our forces connected across war zones I'll never be allowed to talk about in detail. I had a secret clearance by year 2, top secret by year 4. I learned how to keep my mouth shut. I learned how compartmentalization works. I learned that the government keeps secrets for good reasons, and that most of those secrets are boring administrative stuff that would put you to sleep if you actually knew them. I got out in 2010 with an honorable discharge, a head full of technical knowledge, and absolutely no idea what to do with my life. The job market was still recovering from the 2008 crash. I spent 6 months working at a Best Buy in Houston, helping middle-aged women pick out laptops, trying not to lose my mind. That's when a buddy from my Air Force days told me NASA was hiring. Not astronauts, not engineers, support staff. They needed people with security clearances and technical backgrounds to work in their archives and data management divisions. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't rocket science, but it was NASA. I applied on a Tuesday. They called me for an interview that Friday. 3 weeks later, I was starting orientation at the Johnson Space Center. For 3 years, I worked in Building 30, in the Archives Division, digitizing historical documents. Think old Apollo mission reports, space shuttle maintenance logs, decades of engineering paperwork that needed to be scanned and catalogued before it turned to dust. My security clearance got me in the door, but my personality kept me there. I was quiet, reliable. I showed up on time, did my work, never gossiped in the break room. I didn't have social media accounts. I lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment in Clear Lake. My hobbies were reading history books and going to the gym. I was, in every possible way, invisible. The kind of employee who gets excellent performance reviews and no one can quite remember your face at the Christmas party. And that made me perfect for sensitive work. They started giving me special projects in 2017. Nothing dramatic at first. Just assignments that required working after hours or handling materials that were technically still classified but being prepared for declassification. I'd sign extra NDAs, get briefed by a supervisor, spend a week scanning old documents from the Gemini program or early space shuttle designs. The pay was good, the work was interesting enough, and I felt trusted, valued, like I was being brought into the inner circle. Looking back now, I can see it for what it was, a grooming process. They were testing me, seeing if I could be trusted with progressively more sensitive material, seeing if I asked questions. I never did. I just did the work, filed my reports, and went home. Model employee, model citizen, model idiot. My life outside of work was almost aggressively normal. I dated occasionally, nothing serious. I had a cat named Armstrong. Yes, named after Neil Armstrong, because of course I did. I went to my parents' house in Tyler for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I played basketball on weekends with some guys from the gym. I voted in every election. I had a 401k and a savings account, and a car payment on a used Honda Civic. If you'd asked anyone who knew me to describe Marcus Webb, they would have said, nice guy, kind of quiet, really into space stuff. Nothing weird about him. And that was true. There was nothing weird about me. I was exactly the kind of person who would never, ever believe in conspiracy theories, which is exactly why they trusted me with the Apollo archives. When my supervisor, Dr. Richard Castellano, called me into his office on September 14, 2018, I thought I was getting another routine assignment, maybe some Mercury program documents or early Mars probe telemetry data. Instead, he closed his office door, which he never did, and sat down across from me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Serious, almost nervous. He asked me if I'd ever worked with photographic negatives. I told him I'd done some basic film scanning in previous projects, nothing extensive. He nodded slowly, like he was deciding something in real time. Then he told me about the Apollo 11 negatives. A collection that had been in deep storage since 1969, never fully processed, never completely catalogued. With the 50th anniversary behind them, NASA wanted everything properly archived. It would be my project. Solo, after hours, secure workspace. He made it sound like an honor. I remember the exact words he used when he handed me the assignment folder. He said, "Marcus, this is important work, historical preservation. But it's also sensitive. Some of these materials have never been seen by the public, and we need to make sure everything is handled properly before any decisions are made about declassification. You understand?" I nodded. Of course I understood. I'd been handling classified materials for years. He looked at me for a long moment, like he was searching for something in my face. Then he smiled. "Good," he said. "I knew I could count on you." And just like that, I walked out of his office with a yellow folder under my arm, excited to be working on the most famous space mission in history. I had no idea I was being handed a loaded gun with my own fingerprints on it. No idea that in 3 weeks, everything I believed about my country, my job, and the universe itself was about to collapse. The archive room was in the basement of Building 30, at the end of a hallway that most people didn't even know existed. To get there, you had to swipe your badge 3 times, once at the main entrance, once at the stairwell door, and once at the archive entrance itself. Each swipe logged your name, the time, and your clearance level in a database that someone, somewhere, was definitely monitoring. The room itself was maybe 20 feet by 30 feet, painted that institutional beige that every government building seems to be required to use. No windows. Fluorescent lights that hummed constantly with a frequency that would give you a headache if you thought about it too hard. The air was kept at exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit with 40% humidity, optimal conditions for preserving old film and paper documents. It smelled like dust and chemicals and history. My workstation was a metal desk against the far wall, equipped with a high-resolution film scanner that probably cost more than my annual salary. Next to it was a light box for examining negatives, a computer terminal connected to NASA's internal archive database, and a locked cabinet containing white cotton gloves, cleaning supplies, and archival storage materials. Everything was organized with the kind of obsessive precision that you only find in places where people understand that carelessness can destroy irreplaceable pieces of human achievement. On my first day working the Apollo project, I spent an hour just setting up my workspace exactly right, cleaning the scanner glass, calibrating the color profiles, arranging my tools within easy reach. I was excited. This wasn't just a job. This was handling actual artifacts from the moon landing. I felt like I'd been chosen for something special. The routine Dr. Castellano established was specific. I was to arrive at 6:09 p.m., after the day shift had cleared out. The building would be mostly empty, just security guards making their rounds and maybe a few engineers working late in other sections. I'd swipe in, sign the logbook at the security desk, take the elevator down to the basement, and let myself into the archive room. The negatives were stored in a climate-controlled vault inside the room, organized in numbered boxes that corresponded to specific Apollo missions and film magazines. My job was simple: remove one box at a time, scan each negative at maximum resolution, enter detailed metadata into the database, and return the materials to the vault before moving on to the next box. 4 hours a night, 5 nights a week. Dr. Castellano estimated the whole project would take about 3 months. He gave me very specific instructions during my initial briefing. First, I was to work alone. No exceptions. This wasn't about secrecy, he explained. It was about accountability. With one person handling the materials, there was no confusion about chain of custody. If something got damaged or misfiled, we'd know exactly what happened. Second, I was not to remove anything from the archive room. No negatives, no scans on portable drives, nothing. Everything stayed in the secure NASA network. Third, if I found anything unusual, damaged negatives, mislabeled materials, anything that didn't match the catalog descriptions, I was to note it in my daily report, but not take any independent action, just document and inform. And fourth, I was to keep the project confidential. Not secret, he clarified, but confidential. My family could know I was working on Apollo materials. My co-workers could know I had a special assignment. But the specific details, what I was scanning, what I was seeing, that stayed in-house. Standard protocol for sensitive historical materials. I started on September 17th, 2018, a Monday night. I remember swiping into the archive room at 5:58 p.m., 2 minutes early because I'm always early. The vault was already unlocked. Dr. Castellano had opened it before he left for the day. Inside were 47 boxes, each about the size of a shoebox, labeled with combinations of letters and numbers that indicated mission, film magazine, and frame ranges. Box AP1101 through AP1147, the Apollo 11 Photographic Archive. I pulled out box AP1101, carried it carefully to my workstation and opened it like I was defusing a bomb. Inside were 24 strips of 70mm film negatives, each strip containing multiple frames, all nestled in archival sleeves. I lifted the first strip out with my gloved hands, held it up to the light, and saw the lunar surface in negative, black sky, white terrain, grey shadows. It was beautiful. The first week was pure joy. I was looking at images that most people had only seen in processed, printed form. I was seeing the raw data, the original captures, the unfiltered moments from humanity's greatest achievement, frame after frame of the lunar module descent, the first boot prints, the flag raising, Buzz Aldrin's iconic visor shot, rock samples, equipment deployments. Some of the images were slightly out of focus or poorly framed or completely black from exposure errors, the rejects that never made it into the official NASA catalog. But even those felt precious. They were proof that the astronauts were human, that they made mistakes, that this wasn't some perfectly choreographed movie, but a real mission happening in real time under impossible conditions. I'd finish each night physically tired from hunching over the scanner, but mentally energized. I'd drive home thinking about what I'd seen, about the courage it took to walk on another world. By the second week, the work had settled into a comfortable rhythm. I'd gotten faster at handling the negatives, more efficient with my scanning technique. I could process about 30 to 40 frames per night, depending on their condition and how much metadata I needed to enter. The archive database required detailed descriptions, camera settings, timestamps, subject matter, quality ratings. Sometimes a single frame would take me 10 minutes to fully catalog, but I didn't mind. I was being paid overtime to do something I would have done for free. I started bringing my dinner with me, usually a sandwich and some fruit, so I could eat at my desk and maximize my scanning time. The security guards started recognizing me on their rounds. "Working late again, Marcus?" they'd say, and I'd nod and smile and they'd move on. I was becoming part of the building's nighttime ecosystem. The only thing that occasionally struck me as odd was how isolated the work was. In 3 years at NASA, I'd never had an assignment where I didn't interact with at least a few other people during the day. There were always meetings, questions, collaborative projects. But the Apollo Archive project was different. Dr. Castellano would check in with me via email every few days, asking about my progress and whether I'd encountered any problems, but we never met in person. I never saw anyone else in the basement hallway. The archive room door stayed locked behind me, and I had the only key assigned to the evening shift. Sometimes I'd work for 4 hours straight without hearing another human voice. Just me, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the mechanical sound of the scanner, and the whisper of my own breathing inside that beige room. It felt like being in a sensory deprivation tank, except instead of floating in silence, I was drowning in history. Looking back now, I can see all the warning signs I missed. The isolation wasn't about chain of custody, it was about control. They wanted me alone because they wanted me contained. They wanted no witnesses to what I might find, no casual conversations where I might mention something interesting I'd seen. The confidentiality agreement wasn't about protecting historical materials, it was about protecting their secrets. And the specific instructions to report anything unusual but take no independent action, that was them making sure I'd follow protocol even if I saw something that didn't make sense. They were banking on my military training, my by-the-book personality, my desperate need to be a good employee, and it almost worked. It would have worked, actually, if I hadn't found that envelope on Friday, October 5th, 2018. Box AP1132. The box that wasn't supposed to exist, the box that changed everything. Let me tell you about the images that everyone knows, the ones that made it into textbooks and documentaries and museum exhibits. Because before I get to what I found, before I show you what they've been hiding, you need to understand just how normal everything seemed, how legitimate, how completely perfectly, boringly real the Apollo 11 archive appeared to be for those first 2.5 weeks, because that's what made the later discovery so devastating. It wasn't like I was looking for something wrong. I wasn't hunting for conspiracies or expecting to find evidence of a cover-up. I was just doing my job, scanning history and falling in love with it all over again. Box AP1101 through AP1115 contained exactly what you'd expect from the most documented space mission in human history. Hundreds of frames showing the Earth from various distances during the journey out. You've probably seen the famous blue marble shot, the whole Earth suspended in black space, swirled with clouds, achingly beautiful and fragile. But what you haven't seen are the 73 other attempts to capture that same image. Slightly different angles, different exposures, some overexposed so badly the Earth is just a white blob, some underexposed so it's barely visible against the darkness. The astronauts were taking pictures constantly, bracketing their shots like any photographer would, trying to get at least one perfect frame. Seeing all those attempts, all those imperfect versions of an iconic image, made it feel more real to me. These weren't staged publicity shots. These were guys with cameras doing their best in impossible conditions. The lunar descent images were incredible. Frame after frame showing the moon getting closer, the craters getting more detailed, the shadows getting sharper. I could track the entire landing sequence through the photographs. The moment the lunar module separated from the command module, the slow approach to the surface, the final seconds before touchdown, when you could see rocks and dust and the actual texture of the lunar soil rushing up toward the camera. Some frames were blurred from motion, some were perfectly crisp. In one sequence, you could see the shadow of the lunar module growing larger on the surface below, like a ghost reaching down to touch solid ground. I spent an entire night just on the descent sequence, making sure every frame was scanned at maximum quality, because I knew these were the images that future historians would study to understand exactly how we landed on the moon. Then came the surface images. This is where things got really interesting, because I was seeing stuff that the public never got. Not because it was secret, just because it wasn't the hero shots that NASA chose to release. For every iconic image of Buzz Aldrin standing next to the flag, there were 20 frames of him walking away from the camera, or adjusting his equipment, or just standing there doing nothing interesting. For every perfectly composed shot of the lunar module, there were a dozen images of rocks. Just rocks, close-ups of lunar soil samples, boot prints from different angles, equipment scattered on the ground. The astronauts were documenting everything, creating a visual record of the entire EVA, and most of it was mundane, beautiful, historically important but mundane. I found myself fascinated by the mistakes. Frame 421 in box AP1108 was completely black. Someone had forgotten to remove the lens cap. Frame 5556 was just a blurry shot of someone's glove, accidentally taken while handling the camera. There was a whole sequence in box AP1111 where you could tell Armstrong was trying to photograph a specific rock formation, but the sun angle was wrong, and every shot was washed out with glare. He took 14 attempts, adjusting his position each time before he finally got one usable frame. These little moments of human error were everywhere in the archive, and they made me smile. They proved that this wasn't some Hollywood production. Real people took these photos. Real astronauts who got frustrated with camera settings and made composition mistakes and kept trying until they got it right. By the end of week 2, I'd processed boxes AP1101 through AP1122. That was nearly 800 individual frames, each one scanned, catalogued, and uploaded to the NASA archive database. My daily reports to Dr. Castellano were routine and boring. Processed 38 frames, no damage detected. Metadata entered, all materials returned to Vault. He'd reply with equally routine emails. Good work, Marcus. Keep it up. I was ahead of schedule. The project was going smoothly. I was even starting to think about what assignment might come next once this was finished. Maybe the Gemini missions or early space shuttle photography. I remember telling my mom on the phone that I'd found my calling, that this was exactly the kind of work I wanted to do for the rest of my career. She asked if I'd seen anything surprising. I laughed and said no, it was all exactly what you'd expect. Moon rocks and astronauts and American flags. The images from the flag planting were particularly moving. Everyone's seen the famous shot, the stars and stripes standing rigid in the airless lunar environment, the astronauts saluting, the lunar module in the background. But in the archive, I found the before and after shots. The astronauts struggling to get the pole into the ground, the fabric hanging limp because there's no wind. The moment they stepped back to look at what they'd accomplished, two men standing alone on another world, having just planted their country's flag in soil that had been untouched for 4 billion years. I'm not ashamed to say I got emotional scanning those frames. I'm a patriot. I believe in what America accomplished that day. And seeing the raw, unfiltered documentation of that moment, seeing all the small human details that didn't make it into the history books, it reinforced everything I believed about the mission. Week 3 started with box AP1123. More surface photography, more equipment documentation, more scientific samples being collected and photographed from every angle. The astronauts had a checklist of tasks to complete during their limited time on the surface, and the photos showed them methodically working through that list. Deploy the seismometer, set up the laser reflector, collect rock samples from different areas, plant the solar wind collector, every action documented, every piece of equipment photographed before and after deployment. It was like watching a highly trained team execute a complex plan with precision and discipline. Even when things didn't go perfectly, there was a shot of Aldrin trying to hammer a core sample tube into the ground and clearly struggling with it. They adapted and kept moving forward. Professional, competent, heroic. I was working on box AP1131 on Thursday night, October 4th, when I decided to stay an extra hour past my normal quitting time. I'd gotten into a good rhythm and didn't want to break my concentration. The frames I was scanning showed the astronauts preparing to leave the lunar surface, packing up equipment, taking final photographs, doing last-minute checks before climbing back into the lunar module. There was something bittersweet about those images. You could almost feel the reluctance, the knowledge that they were leaving a place they'd never see again, a place that humans might not return to for decades. I scanned the last frame from box AP1131 at 10:47 p.m. It was a shot looking back at the landing site from inside the lunar module, taken just before they sealed the hatch. The flag, the experiments, the boot prints, all of it perfectly preserved in the vacuum, waiting for no one. I logged the completion of the box in my report, returned the materials to the vault, and locked everything up. Then I went home, microwaved some leftovers, and went to bed, completely unaware that the next night, Friday, October 5th, I would open box AP1132 and discover something that would destroy my entire understanding of reality. Friday, October 5th, 2018. I arrived at the archive room at 5:55 p.m., 5 minutes early like always. I swiped my badge, signed the logbook, nodded at the security guard whose name I still didn't know, and took the elevator down to the basement. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly in that way they always did. I'd stopped noticing it weeks ago. I unlocked the archive room door, stepped inside, and locked it behind me. The temperature was exactly 68 degrees. The humidity was exactly 40%. Everything was exactly as it should be. I had no reason to think that night would be different from any other night. No premonition, no sense of foreboding. Just another Friday evening, scanning old photographs, getting paid overtime to handle history. If I'd known what the next 4 hours would do to my life, I would have walked out right then, but I didn't know. So I put on my white cotton gloves, logged into my workstation, and opened the vault. Box AP1132 was where it should be, sitting on the shelf between box AP1131 and box AP1133. Same size as all the others, same basic labeling format. But when I pulled it out and carried it to my workstation, I noticed something immediately. It was lighter than the previous boxes. Not dramatically lighter, but enough that my hands registered the difference. I set it down on my desk and opened the lid. Inside, instead of the usual neat arrangement of film strips in archival sleeves, there was chaos. Negatives were loose, overlapping each other. Some were still in sleeves, but the sleeves were old, yellowed, not the modern archival materials that everything else had been stored in. And sitting on top of everything, partially hidden under a strip of film, was a manila envelope. Old, yellow, soft at the edges. Someone had written on it in thick black Sharpie, all capital letters, AP11 MISC Confidential. I sat there for a moment, just staring at it. In 3 weeks of working this project, I'd never seen anything labeled like that. Everything had proper catalogue numbers. Everything had digital records. Everything followed the archival standards that NASA had maintained for decades. But this envelope looked like something someone had shoved in a drawer in 1969 and forgotten about. I picked it up carefully. It was unsealed, just a metal clasp holding it shut. The paper was so old it felt almost cloth-like. I could see the faint impression of a rubber stamp on the back, too faded to read clearly, but I could make out part of it. Tricted access, authoriza, only. My heart rate picked up. This was wrong. This shouldn't be here. And according to my instructions, if I found anything unusual, I was supposed to note it in my report and inform Dr. Castellano. Not investigate on my own, not open it, just document and report. But here's the thing about being alone in a locked room in a basement with something that looks like a Cold War secret. Curiosity is stronger than protocol. I told myself I needed to see what was inside in order to properly document it. I told myself that opening the envelope was part of doing my job correctly. I told myself a lot of things in the 30 seconds I spent trying to justify what I was about to do. Then I stopped thinking and opened the clasp. Inside were 23 photographic negatives, loose, no sleeves, just raw film stacked on top of each other, and underneath them, folded twice, was a piece of paper, actual paper, handwritten, in blue ink that had faded to a pale grey. I pulled it out carefully and unfolded it. The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical, like someone had been trained to write clearly for official documents. It said, "For NSA review per Directive 47, Majestic Protocol applies. Do not catalogue with public archive materials. Transfer to Site R for permanent storage upon completion of analysis." JM 07-29-69. I read it 3 times. Then I read it again. NSA, National Security Agency, Majestic Protocol. I'd heard that term before. In the conspiracy theory circles I'd occasionally browsed online, usually attached to UFO stories and alien cover-up theories. But this wasn't a grainy photo on some random website. This was a physical note on aged paper, written by someone with the initials JM, dated July 29th, 1969, less than 2 weeks after Apollo 11 returned to Earth. Site R. I knew that designation too. It was the old code name for Raven Rock Mountain Complex, the underground bunker in Pennsylvania that was built as an alternate command center during the Cold War. Why would Apollo 11 photographs need to be transferred to a military bunker? Why would the NSA be reviewing images from a civilian space mission? And what the hell was Majestic Protocol? I set the note aside and picked up the first negative. At first glance, it looked like dozens of other lunar surface shots I'd already scanned. The horizon, lunar soil in the foreground, black sky above, the familiar grey landscape of the Sea of Tranquility. I held it up to my lightbox, squinting at the details. Nothing unusual, just another surface photo. I placed it on the scanner bed, closed the lid, and initiated the scan. The machine hummed. The light bar passed under the negative once, twice. The image appeared on my monitor in high resolution. I zoomed in, examining every detail: rocks, shadows, boot prints, the distant horizon where the lunar surface curved away into blackness. Everything normal, everything exactly as expected. I was starting to think maybe this was just a filing error, someone being overly cautious during the Cold War, marking routine photos as confidential for no good reason. Then I scanned the second negative. It was similar to the first, same area, slightly different angle. The kind of bracketed shot photographers take to make sure they get good coverage. I pulled it up on my monitor next to the first image, comparing them. Same basic composition, same lighting, same weight. I leaned closer to the screen. In the background, right at the horizon line, there was something in the second photo that wasn't in the first. A dark, vertical shape, very small, very distant. I zoomed in, increasing the magnification until the pixels started to break apart. The shape was too geometric to be a rock, too regular. It looked almost like a tower or an antenna. A thin, vertical line against the black sky, perfectly straight, impossibly straight, standing on the horizon approximately 3 or 4 kilometers from where the photo was taken. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the third negative. Please be a camera artifact, I thought. Please be a scratch on the film, or a processing error, or literally anything except what I think this is. I scanned it. This one was zoomed in slightly, showing more detail of the horizon area. And the vertical shape was clearer now. Definitely not a rock, definitely not a camera artifact. It was a structure, man-made or something made, rising from the lunar surface like a radio tower, except we didn't put any radio towers on the moon. The Apollo astronauts had deployed experiments, sure, but nothing that looked like this, nothing vertical, nothing that tall. I checked the metadata embedded in the negative. Film magazine designation, MA68, frame number 5384. Camera, Hasselblad 70mm. Date, July 20th, 1969. Location, Mare Tranquillitatis. This was taken during the EVA. This was real. I sat back in my chair, staring at the image on my screen. My brain was trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was a reflection. Maybe it was a known piece of Apollo equipment that I just wasn't recognizing. Maybe this whole envelope was a training exercise, fake photos used to test archivists or security personnel. But the note, the handwritten note mentioning NSA and Majestic Protocol and Site R, that was real. The paper was real. The age of everything was real. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice was saying, they found something on the moon. They found something and they've been hiding it for 50 years. And now you're holding the proof. I picked up the next negative with trembling hands. My Friday night had just stopped being routine. My life had just stopped being normal. And I had 20 more negatives to scan. I didn't move for a full minute. Just sat there, staring at that vertical structure on my monitor, my mind racing through every possible explanation that wasn't the obvious one. It could be a defect in the film emulsion. It could be a scratch that happened during development in 1969. It could be a processing artifact, a chemical stain, a hair that got stuck to the negative during storage. 50 years is a long time. Film degrades. Things happen. But even as I was thinking these thoughts, I knew they were wrong. The structure was too consistent across multiple frames, too geometric, too deliberate. And that handwritten note, Majestic Protocol applies, that wasn't the kind of thing you write on a misfiled envelope. That was the kind of thing you write when you're dealing with something that could never, ever be allowed to go public. I forced myself to keep scanning. -4, -5, -6. Each one showing the same area from slightly different angles and distances, and in each one, the structure was there. Sometimes barely visible as a thin line against the black sky, sometimes more prominent, depending on the sun angle and the exposure settings. By the 7th negative, I could see more details. The structure wasn't perfectly straight. It had a slight taper, wider at the base, narrowing toward the top. And there appeared to be something at the apex, a thicker section that could have been equipment or a cross beam, or something I didn't have the resolution to identify. The 8th negative was a closer shot, and I could finally see the base clearly. It was sitting on the lunar surface, surrounded by disturbed soil, like something had been installed there. Not natural, not geological, artificial. -9 made my stomach drop. It was a wide-angle shot, showing more of the lunar horizon, and there were 3 more structures, all vertical, all similar in design to the first one I'd seen, spread out across the landscape at regular intervals, maybe 2 or 3 kilometers apart. They formed a pattern, a deliberate arrangement, like a communications array or a sensor grid or something that required multiple points to function. I zoomed in on each structure individually. They were identical. Same height, same design, same tapering shape. Whatever they were, they'd been manufactured, built to specification, deployed according to a plan, and the Apollo 11 astronauts had photographed them, which meant Armstrong and Aldrin had seen them, which meant NASA had known about them since July 1969, which meant everything I'd believed about the moon landing was only part of the story. I pulled out my phone, against protocol, but protocol had stopped mattering about 20 minutes ago, and started searching online for the official Apollo 11 images. NASA has a public archive, thousands of photos available for anyone to download. I found the catalog page for film magazine MA68, the same magazine these classified negatives had come from. I scrolled through the public frames looking for numbers close to 5384, frame 5382, frame 5381, frame 5382, frame 5383. Then it jumped to frame 5401, 18 frames missing from the public archive, 18 frames that had been removed, skipped over, erased from the official record. I went back to the classified negatives and checked their frame numbers. 5384 through 5406, 23 consecutive frames, all of them showing structures on the lunar surface, all of them absent from the public database. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when I found a public photo that matched one of the classified negatives almost exactly. Public frame 5407, a wide shot of the lunar horizon, beautiful and desolate, the kind of image that ended up in coffee table books about space exploration. I pulled up classified negative number 15 on my other monitor and compared them side by side. Same camera position, same angle, same lighting, same rocks in the foreground. But in the public version, the horizon was empty, clean. Just the gentle curve of the lunar surface against the black sky. In the classified version, 2 of the tower structures were clearly visible in the background. Someone had edited them out, erased them, painted over them with reconstructed lunar terrain so seamlessly that unless you knew they were supposed to be there, you'd never notice they were missing. I started sweating despite the 68-degree temperature. My hands were shaking so badly I had trouble handling the next negative. I scanned it anyway. This one was different, a close-up shot of the nearest structure, taken from maybe 500 meters away. I could see surface details now. The material looked metallic, reflecting sunlight in a way that lunar rock never would. There were panels or segments, like it had been assembled from modular components, and near the base, partially buried in lunar soil, were objects that looked almost like footprints, but not boot prints from a spacesuit. These were smaller, different, arranged in a pattern that suggested something had walked around the structure, inspecting it or maintaining it, or doing whatever the hell you do to mysterious towers on the moon. Negative 17 showed movement. I almost missed it at first because the exposure was poor, underlit, most of the frame consumed by shadow. But when I adjusted the brightness and contrast, I could see it, something small, moving across the lunar surface in the background of the shot. The image was blurred. Either the camera had moved during the exposure, or the object had been moving fast enough to create motion blur. It was roughly spherical, maybe a meter in diameter, hovering about 2 feet above the ground, leaving no dust trail, no visible means of propulsion, just floating there, caught in a single frame like a ghost, like something that shouldn't exist but does. I checked the timestamp metadata. This photo was taken at 03:17:42 UTC on July 21st, 1969. Right in the middle of the Apollo 11 EVA, right when Armstrong and Aldrin were supposed to be alone on the lunar surface. The next 3 negatives showed the same object from different angles and distances. In one frame, it appeared to be moving toward the lunar module. In another, it was stationary, hovering near one of the tower structures, like it was connected to them somehow. The image quality wasn't good enough to see fine details, but I could make out what looked like surface patterns, geometric designs or panel lines, something that suggested sophisticated engineering. This wasn't a rock. This wasn't a piece of equipment dropped by the astronauts. This was something else, something autonomous, something that had been on the moon before we got there, or something that had arrived at the same time, watching, observing, documenting our first steps on another world. I scanned the final 3 negatives in a daze, more structures, more impossible geometries rising from the lunar soil. One frame showed what looked like an entrance, a dark rectangular opening in the side of a low hill, too regular to be a natural cave, too precise to be anything except a doorway. Another showed disturbed ground in a pattern that suggested excavation or construction, lunar soil pushed into berms and ridges that formed shapes no natural process could create. And the last negative, frame 5406, showed the Earth rising over the lunar horizon, our blue planet hanging in the black void, beautiful and fragile and completely unaware that on the dead world beneath it, there was evidence of something that rewrote everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. I stared at that final image for a long time, thinking about the 2 astronauts who'd taken these photos. Thinking about what they must have felt, seeing these things with their own eyes, knowing they could never tell anyone, knowing their triumph would always be shadowed by the secret they'd been ordered to keep. I checked my watch. It was 9:34 p.m. I'd been in the archive room for almost 4 hours, and I'd spent the last 90 minutes scanning 23 photographs that proved that Apollo 11 had discovered something on the moon that NASA had hidden from the public for 50 years. I looked at my computer screen, at the folder full of high-resolution scans, at the evidence that could change human history. Then I looked at the vault, still open, box AP1132, sitting on my desk with its yellowed envelope and its impossible negatives. I was supposed to catalog this, enter it into the database, return the materials to storage, file my daily report, follow protocol. But if I did that, these images would disappear. Someone would notice them in the system. Someone would delete them, move them, make them vanish like they'd vanished from the public archive 50 years ago. I had minutes, maybe hours, before someone realized what I'd found. So I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled out my personal phone and I started taking pictures of my computer screen. Every image, every frame, every impossible structure, and every floating object and every piece of evidence that we weren't alone on the moon. My hands were steady now. My fear had crystallized into something else, determination, because someone needed to know, someone needed to see what I'd seen. And if they were going to make me disappear, and I was pretty sure they were, then I was going to make damn sure the truth survived me. After I'd photographed every scan on my monitor, I turned my attention back to the handwritten note. That piece of paper suddenly felt more dangerous than the photographs themselves. The images could theoretically be explained away as anomalies, artifacts, processing errors. I didn't believe that, but someone could argue it. But this note? This was direct evidence of intentional concealment. This was someone in 1969 giving explicit orders to hide these materials from the public archive. I unfolded it carefully and laid it flat on my desk under the bright LED of my workstation lamp. The paper was standard government issue from that era, slightly yellowed with age, with a faint watermark I could just barely make out. U.S. Government Official, Use Only. The blue ink had faded to a dusty grey blue, but the handwriting was still perfectly legible. I photographed the note from multiple angles, making sure I captured every detail. Then I read it again, this time parsing every single word like my life depended on it, because maybe it did. For NSA review per Directive 47. In the National Security Agency, reviewing photographs from a civilian space mission. That alone was strange. NASA and the NSA were separate entities with different mandates. Why would signals intelligence specialists be reviewing lunar photographs? Unless the photographs contained something that fell under national security, something that couldn't be made public. Directive 47. I'd never heard of it, and a quick search on my phone turned up nothing. Either it was so classified that no information had ever leaked, or it was an internal designation that only existed in certain circles. Either way, it meant this wasn't casual. This was protocol. This was following established procedures for handling something specific. Majestic protocol applies. I stared at those three words for a long time. Anyone who's ever gone down a conspiracy theory rabbit hole knows about Majestic 12, the alleged secret committee formed in 1947 to handle UFO sightings and extraterrestrial contact. Most serious researchers dismissed it as a hoax, based on documents that were probably forged in the 1980s. But here was that word, majestic, written on an official note from 1969, more than a decade before those supposedly forged documents appeared. Which meant either this note was also a forgery, planted here to mess with me, specifically, or Majestic was real and had been operational for decades. I didn't want to believe it. I'd spent my entire adult life trusting institutions, believing in the integrity of government systems, but the evidence was right in front of me. Photographic proof of structures on the moon, a note referencing a protocol that wasn't supposed to exist, and my hands were shaking again. Do not catalogue with public archive materials. That line was underlined twice, the pen pressed hard enough into the paper that I could feel the indentation on the back. Whoever wrote this wanted to make absolutely certain this instruction was followed. These negatives were never meant to be mixed with the regular Apollo material. They were supposed to stay separate, isolated, accessible only to people with the right clearance and the right need to know. Which raised an obvious question. How did they end up in box AP 1132, sitting on a shelf in the Building 30 archive vault? Someone had made a mistake, or someone had hidden them here intentionally, betting that they'd be overlooked during routine processing. Either way, I'd found them, and now I had to decide what to do about it. Transfer to Site R for permanent storage upon completion of analysis. Site R, Raven Rock Mountain Complex. I knew about it because I'd been stationed at bases that coordinated with it during my Air Force years. It's the underground bunker in Pennsylvania, built into solid granite, designed to be an alternate command center in case Washington, D.C. was destroyed during a nuclear war. It has its own power, its own water, its own everything. And apparently, it has storage facilities for classified Apollo 11 photographs. The phrase, permanent storage, stood out to me. Not temporary, not pending review. Permanent. These photos were supposed to disappear into a mountain and never come out. The fact that they were still here, 50 years later, meant something had gone wrong with the transfer. Or someone had deliberately prevented it. I wondered who JM was, the person who'd signed the note. Some NASA administrator, an NSA liaison, a member of this alleged Majestic group. Whoever they were, they'd had the authority to classify lunar photographs and redirect them to a military installation. The date at the bottom, 07 to 2969, July 29th, 1969. Apollo 11 had splashed down in the Pacific Ocean on July 24th. The astronauts had been in quarantine, standard protocol for returning from the moon, just in case they'd brought back some kind of lunar pathogen. This note was written 5 days after they returned, which meant the film had already been developed, reviewed and classified within less than a week of the mission's end. That was fast, suspiciously fast. It suggested that someone had been waiting for these specific images. Someone knew what the astronauts had seen and photographed on the surface. Someone had procedures already in place for handling this exact situation. This wasn't improvised. This was planned. They'd known before Apollo 11 even launched that there might be something on the moon worth hiding. I sat back in my chair and tried to think rationally. I was a NASA employee with a top-secret clearance, sitting in a secure facility, holding classified materials that I'd been assigned to process. Technically, I hadn't done anything wrong yet. I'd opened an envelope that was in a box I was supposed to be cataloging. I'd scanned negatives that were part of my assigned project. Yes, I'd photographed them with my personal phone, but I could argue I was just documenting an unusual finding before reporting it to my supervisor. I could still walk this back. I could put everything in the box, seal it up, send an email to Dr. Castellano saying I'd found classified materials that appeared to be misfiled and let the system handle it. That was the safe play, the smart play. The play that would keep me employed and alive and out of whatever black site they send people who see too much. But I couldn't do it because I kept thinking about those structures on the moon. Those impossible towers that had been standing there for God knows how long. And I kept thinking about Armstrong and Aldrin walking on that surface, seeing those things with their own eyes, and then coming home to a hero's welcome and never saying a word. How many people knew? How many people had seen these photographs and decided the public couldn't handle the truth? And what did it mean that we'd found evidence of non-human construction on the moon and the response was to hide it, to classify it, to lock it in a mountain and pretend it didn't exist? The public had a right to know. Humanity had a right to know. We weren't alone in the universe, and our government had been sitting on that information for half a century. I made my decision. I would return the negatives to the box. I would put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I would log out of my workstation, lock the vault, go home, and act like nothing had happened. But first, I would back up the scans I'd made. I would encrypt them. I would hide copies in places where they couldn't be easily found or deleted. And then, when I was ready, when I had a plan, I would figure out how to get this information to someone who could actually do something with it. A journalist, maybe, or a lawyer, or just the internet. Dump it all online and let it spread before anyone could contain it. I didn't know yet, but I knew I couldn't let these photographs disappear back into darkness. I photographed the handwritten note one more time, making sure I had a crystal clear image of every word. Then I carefully folded it and placed it back in the envelope, exactly as I'd found it. I gathered all 23 negatives, arranged them in the same order they'd been in, and slid them back into the envelope with the note. My hands were steady now. I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry. Angry that I'd been lied to my entire life. Angry that something this important had been hidden. Angry that I'd been put in this position where doing the right thing meant destroying my career and possibly my life. But I was going to do it anyway, because someone had to. And apparently, that someone was me. I didn't sleep that weekend. Saturday and Sunday were a blur of encrypted cloud uploads, burned DVDs hidden in different locations, and detailed written accounts of everything I'd found. I mailed a package to my lawyer, a guy I'd used once for a lease dispute, nothing dramatic, but he had attorney-client privilege. Inside was a thumb drive and a letter with instructions. If anything happens to me, open this and contact these specific journalists. I created accounts on secure email services I'd never used before. I researched dead man's switches, automated systems that release information if you don't check in regularly. And through it all, I kept my phone off, my laptop disconnected from the internet, and my blinds closed. I was probably being paranoid, but probably wasn't good enough anymore. Monday morning, October 8th, I showed up for work at my normal time, 8:02 a.m. I'd decided the best strategy was to act completely normal. I swiped into the building, nodded at the security guard, took the elevator to my floor. My desk was in an open office area with about 20 other archivists and data technicians. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it Friday afternoon. My coffee mug was still sitting next to my keyboard. My calendar still showed the same meetings. Nothing had changed, except everything had changed, because I knew something I wasn't supposed to know, and I was waiting for the hammer to drop. I logged into my computer and checked my email. Routine stuff, a reminder about updated parking policies, an invitation to a colleague's retirement party, and then at 9:47 a.m. I got a calendar notification. Meeting with Dr. Castellano, 10 a.m., conference room 3B. I stared at that notification for a full minute. Dr. Castellano and I never had meetings in conference rooms. Our communication was almost entirely via email, with maybe one face-to-face conversation per month, usually just him stopping by my desk to ask about progress. A formal meeting, scheduled with less than 15 minutes notice, in a conference room instead of his office, that was wrong. That was the kind of meeting you have when something serious needs to be discussed. I thought about not going, just standing up, walking out of the building, getting in my car and driving. But where would I go, and what would that accomplish, except confirming I knew something I shouldn't? So I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked to conference room 3B like a man walking to his own execution. Dr. Castellano was already there when I arrived. So was someone else. A woman I'd never seen before, maybe 45 years old, wearing a dark grey pantsuit that screamed federal government. She didn't introduce herself. Dr. Castellano looked uncomfortable, his tie slightly loosened, sweat visible on his forehead despite the aggressive air conditioning. "Marcus," he said, "please, sit down." I sat. The woman remained standing, her arms crossed, watching me with an expression that gave away nothing. Dr. Castellano cleared his throat. "There's been an issue with the Apollo archive project, specifically with some materials you processed Friday night." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept my face neutral. "An issue?" I said. "What kind of issue?" "A cataloging error," Dr. Castellano said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "Some negatives were accidentally included in box AP1132 that should have been elsewhere. Materials that weren't part of the public archive project." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Did you happen to scan anything unusual Friday night? Anything that seemed out of place?" The woman was still watching me, her gaze intense, looking for any tell, any indication that I knew exactly what he was talking about. I made a split-second decision. Deny everything. Play dumb. Make them prove I'd seen something. "I scanned everything in box AP1132, I said carefully. "There were some loose negatives in an old envelope, but I assumed they were just misfiled Apollo materials. I catalogued them like everything else." The woman spoke for the first time. Her voice was flat, professional, completely devoid of warmth. "Did you upload those scans to the NASA archive database?" I nodded. "Yes, ma'am, that's standard protocol. Everything gets scanned and uploaded." She exchanged a glance with Dr. Castellano. "And did you notice anything unusual about those particular images?" I shrugged, going for confused instead of defensive. "Unusual how? They looked like lunar surface shots to me. Pretty standard stuff. Why? Is there a problem?" The silence that followed lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Dr. Castellano finally broke it. "Marcus, those scans you uploaded Friday night, they've been removed from the system. There was an error with the file batch. The materials have been reallocated to a different archive project." "Removed," I said, letting genuine surprise show because I was genuinely surprised they were admitting it. "All of them," the woman cut in. "The materials in question are no longer part of your assigned project. You won't see them in your work queue anymore. The box has been relocated. We're just checking in to make sure there weren't any duplicate files or backup copies created during your scan session Friday." She leaned forward slightly. "NASA has very strict protocols about data retention. You understand? Did you create any local copies of those scans? Save them to any external drives? Transfer them to any personal devices?" I met her gaze and lied through my teeth. "No, ma'am. Everything went straight to the archive database like it's supposed to. I don't keep local copies. That would violate protocol." She studied my face for a long moment, and I could see her trying to decide if I was telling the truth. Finally, she straightened up. "Good, Dr. Castellano, I think we're done here." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Mr. Webb, just to be clear, the materials you processed Friday night are now classified under a different security designation. You're not to discuss them with anyone. Not colleagues, not friends, not family. If anyone asks about your work on the Apollo project, you processed routine lunar surface photography. Nothing unusual, nothing interesting. Are we clear?" I nodded. "Crystal clear." She walked out without another word. Dr. Castellano lingered for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something, then just gave me a weak smile and followed her out. I sat in that conference room alone for probably 10 minutes, my hands clenched into fists under the table. They'd deleted the scans from the system, scrubbed them like they never existed, and they were checking to make sure I hadn't made copies, which meant they knew those photos were dangerous. Knew they contained something that couldn't be allowed to spread. The woman's warning was clear: keep your mouth shut or face consequences. But what she didn't know, what they couldn't know unless they'd been monitoring me all weekend, which, given everything, was actually possible, was that I'd already made copies, multiple copies, encrypted and distributed. The cat was already out of the bag. They just didn't know it yet. I went back to my desk and tried to work. Tried to focus on routine tasks, answering emails, organizing files, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time someone walked past my desk, I tensed up. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected it to be another summons to a conference room. At lunch, I went to my car and just sat there, eating a sandwich I didn't taste, watching the parking lot. That's when I first noticed it. A black Chevy Suburban with tinted windows, parked 3 rows away. Engine off, but someone was sitting in the driver's seat. I could see the silhouette through the windshield. They weren't even trying to hide. That was almost worse than if they'd been sneaky about it. It meant they wanted me to know I was being watched, wanted me to feel the pressure, wanted me scared enough to make a mistake. Tuesday was worse. The Suburban followed me to work, followed me home. Parked outside my apartment building all night. I checked at 2 a.m. and it was still there. Wednesday, I started noticing other things. My work computer was running slow, like something in the background was monitoring my activity. My personal email had a login attempt from an IP address in Virginia that wasn't me. My apartment door had a scratch near the lock that I didn't remember being there before. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe I was seeing threats that didn't exist. But the Suburban was real. The deleted files were real. That meeting with the nameless woman was real. And somewhere in a vault in Building 30, there was an empty space where box AP1132 used to be. And nobody except me and a few people with very high security clearances knew it had ever existed. By Thursday, I'd made a decision. I couldn't stay at NASA. Couldn't keep showing up to work, pretending everything was normal, waiting for them to decide I was too much of a risk to leave alone. I started looking at job postings in other states. Started thinking about how to disappear quietly without raising suspicion. But before I could do anything, before I could make a plan, they made their move. Friday morning, exactly 1 week after I'd scanned those negatives, I got an email from Human Resources. Subject line, exciting opportunity, internal transfer. And that's when I knew my time was up. That's when I knew they'd decided what to do with me. I opened the email with trembling hands, already knowing what it would say, already knowing that I had a choice to make, and both options ended with me disappearing one way or another. The email from HR was professionally written, almost cheerful in tone. Dear Marcus, we are pleased to inform you of a unique opportunity for advancement within the NASA family. A position has opened at our research facility in New Mexico, and based on your exemplary performance and security clearance level, you have been selected as a candidate for transfer. This position offers a significant salary increase, enhanced benefits, and the opportunity to work on cutting-edge projects of national importance. Please schedule a meeting with Dr. Castellano at your earliest convenience to discuss details. We look forward to your positive response. It was signed by someone in HR I'd never heard of. The email had been sent at 6:47 a.m., before normal business hours. They wanted me to see it first thing, wanted me thinking about it all day. I read it 3 times, my coffee going cold in my hand. Research facility in New Mexico. They didn't even specify where in New Mexico, just New Mexico. The state with White Sands Missile Range, Los Alamos National Laboratory, and about a dozen other military installations that don't appear on public maps. Cutting-edge projects of national importance that was code for classified work so far above top secret that they couldn't even hint at what it involved. And selected as a candidate was corporate speak for, you don't actually have a choice. This wasn't an opportunity. This was a relocation order dressed up as a promotion. They were moving me somewhere remote, somewhere isolated, somewhere they could control my access to information and monitor my every move. Or maybe, and this thought made my blood run cold, they were moving me somewhere I could conveniently disappear if I became too much of a problem. I couldn't accept it. But I also couldn't just refuse it without raising more suspicion than I'd already raised. I needed help. I needed someone outside NASA, outside the government system, someone who could take what I knew and get it to the public before I vanished into a New Mexico black site. I thought about journalists I'd seen covering space stories. There was a guy at the Houston Chronicle who'd written some good investigative pieces about NASA budget overruns. And there was a woman who ran an independent space news website, credible, respected, known for digging into stories other outlets ignored. I decided to reach out to both of them, but not from my work computer, not from my work phone, not from anything they could be monitoring. During my lunch break, I drove to a public library 15 miles from my apartment, used one of their computers, logged into a burner email account I'd created over the weekend, sent carefully worded messages to both journalists. I'm a NASA employee with information about classified Apollo 11 materials that have been hidden from the public for 50 years. I have photographic evidence. I need to meet in person. Please respond to this email if you're interested. I kept it vague enough that if someone intercepted it, they couldn't immediately prove what I was talking about. Then I waited. Checked the email every hour from my phone, using cellular data instead of Wi-Fi, so it couldn't be traced to my home network. The woman from the Space News website responded first, around 4 p.m. This is interesting. Can you provide any details about the nature of these materials? And why reach out now? I wrote back. The materials show structures on the lunar surface that were edited out of public photographs. I'm reaching out now because I'm being pressured to accept a transfer that would make it impossible for me to share this information. Can we meet? Her response came within minutes. Yes, tomorrow, Saturday, 2 p.m. There's a coffee shop called The Grind on West Gray Street. I'll be at the back table wearing a red jacket. Come alone. I felt a surge of hope. Finally, someone who could help. Someone who could take this story and run with it before they locked me away in New Mexico. I spent Friday afternoon pretending to work, counting down the hours until I could get out of the building. The Suburban was still in the parking lot when I left at 5 p.m., still followed me home, but I'd expected that. What I hadn't expected was the van parked across the street from my apartment. A white panel van with no markings, windows tinted, someone sitting inside. 2 vehicles now. They were tightening the net. Saturday morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. even though I had nowhere to be until 2 p.m. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Just paced around my apartment, going over what I was going to say to the journalist, how much to tell her, whether to give her copies of the photographs immediately or wait until I was sure she was legitimate. I decided to bring one of the encrypted thumb drives I'd prepared, insurance, in case something went wrong. At 1:15 p.m., I left my apartment. The Suburban and the van both pulled out to follow me. I drove to the Grind, parked 2 blocks away, walked the rest of the distance. The coffee shop was moderately crowded for a Saturday afternoon. I scanned the room. No red jacket, no woman at the back table. I checked my phone. 1:58 p.m. I was early. I ordered a coffee I didn't want and sat down at a table near the back where I could watch the door. 2 p.m. came and went, no red jacket. 2:15, still nothing. At 2:30, I checked the burner email on my phone. There was a new message sent at 1:47 p.m. I'm sorry, I can't meet with you. I received a call this morning from someone claiming to be with NASA security. They said you're experiencing a mental health crisis and that you've been making concerning claims about your work. They asked me not to encourage your delusions. I think you need help, but not the kind I can provide. Please seek professional support. I stared at that message, feeling my stomach drop. They'd gotten to her. Somehow they'd identified her, contacted her, fed her a story about me being unstable, and she'd believed it. Or maybe she hadn't believed it, but she'd been scared enough to back off. Either way, the meeting wasn't happening. I tried the Houston Chronicle journalist next, sent him an email from the coffee shop, more urgent this time. Need to meet today. Have evidence of NASA cover-up involving Apollo 11. Time sensitive. I waited an hour, no response. Tried his office number, got voicemail. Tried his cell. The number was listed on his website, and he actually answered. This is Richard Santos. I took a breath. Mr. Santos, my name is Marcus Webb. I sent you an email about classified NASA materials. I need to meet with you. Today, if possible. There was a long pause. Then, Mr. Webb, I got a very interesting phone call this morning from a woman who said she was with NASA Public Affairs. She told me you've been placed on administrative leave for psychological evaluation. She said you've been making false claims about seeing things in the archives that don't exist. She was very concerned about your well-being. My hands were shaking. That's not true. I'm not on leave. I'm being silenced because... He cut me off. Mr. Webb, I'm going to give you some advice. Talk to a lawyer. Talk to a therapist. But don't contact journalists with stories about government conspiracies unless you have ironclad proof. And even then, make sure you're in a mental state to handle what comes next. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. He hung up. I sat in that coffee shop for another 20 minutes, staring at my phone, understanding finally and completely how fucked I was. They'd anticipated this move, had people watching me, monitoring my communications, ready to intercept any attempt to go public. They'd preemptively destroyed my credibility, planting the story that I was mentally unstable, making sure that anyone I contacted would dismiss me as a conspiracy theorist having a breakdown. And the worst part was, it was working. 2 journalists, both credible, both turned away in a matter of hours. I thought about just dumping everything online, uploading the photos to every platform I could think of, letting them spread before anyone could stop it. But that would burn my only leverage. Once the photos were public, I became completely expendable. They could discredit the images as fakes, discredit me as a disturbed former employee, and make me disappear without anyone caring enough to investigate. I needed the photos as insurance, as proof of life. As long as I had something they wanted to keep hidden, they had a reason to keep me alive. When I got back to my apartment, there was a letter taped to my door, not in the mailbox, taped directly to the door where I couldn't miss it. Plain white envelope, my name handwritten on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Marcus, we need to talk about your future. Monday, 9 a.m., Building 30, Conference Room 3B. This is not optional. Come alone, bring nothing. We have a very generous offer to discuss. The alternative is significantly less pleasant. Choose wisely. No signature, no letterhead, just that message, stark and clear. I crumpled the paper in my fist, feeling rage and fear and helplessness all mixed together. They'd backed me into a corner, isolated me, made sure I had nowhere to turn, no one to help. And now they were giving me a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Take the deal, disappear quietly into a New Mexico facility and spend the rest of my life keeping their secrets. Or refuse and face whatever less pleasant alternative they had planned. I had 48 hours to decide how I wanted my life to end. They didn't wait until Monday. Sunday evening, 7:43 p.m., there was a knock on my apartment door. Not the tentative knock of a neighbor or a delivery person, a confident, authoritative knock that said, "We know you're in there and you're going to open this door." I looked through the peephole and saw 2 men in dark suits standing in the hallway. Not the woman from the conference room. 2 men I'd never seen before. One was tall, maybe 6'3", with grey hair cut military short. The other was younger, stockier, with the kind of build that suggested he spent a lot of time in the gym. Both had the unmistakable bearing of federal agents or military officers. Both had expressions that conveyed they were not here to negotiate. I considered not opening the door, but they knew I was home. My car was in the parking lot, lights were on in my apartment, and they'd probably been watching me all day. Refusing to answer would only delay the inevitable, so I opened the door, keeping the chain lock engaged. "Marcus Webb," the taller one said. It wasn't really a question. "We need to talk. May we come in?" I didn't move. "Who are you?" The younger one reached into his jacket. I tensed, hand instinctively moving toward where I would have kept a weapon if I still carried one. But he just pulled out a badge. "Special Agent Morrison, Department of Defense. This is Agent Hall. We're here about your employment situation with NASA and about some materials you accessed 2 weeks ago." I stood there for a moment, weighing my options. They could force their way in if they wanted to. They could arrest me on some fabricated charge. They could make me disappear right now, and nobody would question it because they'd already planted the story that I was mentally unstable. Or I could hear what they had to say, learn what they knew, figure out exactly how much trouble I was in. I unhooked the chain and opened the door. "Come in, but I'm not saying anything without understanding what this is about." They stepped inside, and Morrison closed the door behind them. Hall did a quick visual sweep of my apartment, looking for weapons, recording devices, other people, professional, thorough. When he was satisfied, he nodded to Morrison. Morrison walked to my kitchen table and sat down without being invited, gesturing for me to sit across from him. Hall remained standing near the door, blocking the exit. "Mr. Webb," Morrison began, "let me be very direct with you, because I think you deserve honesty at this point. 2 weeks ago, you scanned a set of photographic negatives that should never have been in that archive vault. Those materials were classified at a level significantly above your clearance. The fact that you saw them was an accident, a clerical error from 1969 that should have been caught decades ago but wasn't. Now we have a situation we need to resolve." I kept my face neutral. "What situation is that?" Morrison leaned back in his chair. "The situation where a NASA employee with a top-secret clearance has seen evidence of anomalous findings from the Apollo 11 mission, and we need to determine what happens next." He paused, studying my reaction. "You made copies, didn't you, of the scans, despite telling Dr. Castellanos' associate that you didn't?" There was no point lying. "Yes." "Where are they?" I met his eyes. "Safe, multiple locations, encrypted, with instructions to be released if anything happens to me." Morrison actually smiled at that, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Smart. That's what I would have done. It's why you're still sitting here having this conversation instead of somewhere else." Hall spoke for the first time, his voice rougher, less polished than Morrison's. "You tried to contact journalists. That was a mistake." "Oh, you intercepted my communications," I said. It wasn't a question. "And you destroyed my credibility before they could hear what I had to say." Morrison nodded. "We've been doing this a long time, Mr. Webb. We know the playbook. We know how whistleblowers operate, and we know how to contain them before they become a problem. You're not the first person to stumble across classified Apollo materials. You're just the most recent." That hit me like a punch to the gut. "There have been others?" "3, Morrison said calmly. "Since 1972, all of them handled quietly. 2 accepted transfers to secure facilities. 1 required more permanent measures." The threat was clear. I forced myself to breathe normally. "What do you want from me?" Morrison pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. "We want you to accept a position at a DoD research facility in New Mexico. Officially, you'll be doing archival and data management work, same as you do now. Unofficially, you'll be working with materials related to what you saw in those photographs. You'll have access to information about the Apollo program that almost nobody else in the world has access to. You'll understand what those structures are, where they came from, and why we've kept them secret for 50 years. And you'll be compensated very well for your silence and your expertise." I stared at the folder. "And if I refuse?" Hall answered this time. "Then we revoke your security clearance. We terminate your employment with NASA for cause unauthorized retention of classified materials. We initiate a criminal investigation, and while that investigation is ongoing, you'll find it very difficult to find work, maintain relationships, or live anything resembling a normal life. Eventually, you might end up in a federal facility anyway, just not the kind where you get paid." Morrison's voice softened slightly. "We don't want that outcome, Marcus. We're not monsters. We're just people trying to protect information that the world isn't ready for. And we think you could be an asset instead of a liability." "Information the world isn't ready for," I repeated. "You mean the fact that there are structures on the moon that weren't built by humans?" Morrison and Hall exchanged a glance. Morrison sighed. "Since you already know part of it, I can tell you a little more. Apollo 11 wasn't just a mission to beat the Soviets to the moon. It was a reconnaissance mission. We knew there was something on the lunar surface before we sent Armstrong and Aldrin. We'd seen evidence in orbital photography from earlier missions. Apollo 8, Apollo 10. We needed boots on the ground to confirm what we were seeing. They confirmed it, and then they photographed it, collected data, and came home. Everything after that was about managing the information. I felt like I was in a dream, a nightmare. What are they? The structures, who built them?" Morrison shook his head. That's above your current clearance level. If you accept the position, you'll get briefed. I can tell you this much, they've been there a long time. A very long time. And they're not the only ones. The moon is more complicated than the public knows. Hall added, every moon mission since Apollo 11 has had a secondary objective related to those structures. Every crew has been briefed before they went up. Every photograph has been screened before release. The public archive you've been working on, it's already been sanitized. You found the one batch of originals that slipped through the cracks. Morrison opened the folder and slid it toward me. Inside were personnel documents, salary information, facility details. The offered salary was nearly triple what I made at NASA. The benefits were extraordinary. The facility was listed as Auxiliary Research Station 7, classified location New Mexico. There were pages of NDAs, security agreements, and acknowledgements. You have until tomorrow morning, Morrison said, 9 a.m. Either you show up to that meeting at Building 30 ready to sign these papers, or you show up ready to face the consequences of your choices. Either way, the photographs you copied stay buried. Either way, this conversation never happened. The only question is whether you spend the next phase of your life contributing to something important, or watching it fall apart. They stood to leave. Hall opened the door, checked the hallway, then stepped out. Morrison paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, Marcus, I understand why you did what you did. The copies, the journalists, all of it. You thought you were doing the right thing, exposing the truth. But the truth isn't always good for people. Sometimes the truth causes panic, chaos, breakdowns in social order. The people who make these decisions, they're not evil. They're just trying to protect a population that isn't equipped to handle certain realities. Think about that tonight. Ask yourself if you really want to be the person who shatters 7 billion people's understanding of their place in the universe. Because once that information is out there, you can't take it back. I sat at my kitchen table for hours after they left, staring at that folder, reading through the documents, thinking about what Morrison had said. Part of me wanted to reject it all, to stick to my principles, to find a way to expose everything despite the consequences. But another part, a larger part, was terrified. Terrified of what they'd do to me if I refused. Terrified of what I'd learned. Terrified of the weight of knowing that humanity wasn't alone, that we'd found proof 50 years ago, and that the people in power had decided we couldn't handle it. By midnight, I'd made my decision. Not because I agreed with them, not because I thought they were right to hide the truth, but because I wanted to live, because I wanted to know more, and because maybe, just maybe, if I was on the inside, I could find a way to bring it all down from within. So I packed a bag, got in my car, and started driving toward New Mexico. Not because they'd convinced me, but because I'd run out of options. I didn't go straight to New Mexico. I drove to Tyler, Texas instead, my hometown, 3 hours north of Houston. It was 2 a.m. when I pulled into my parents' driveway. The house was dark. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching the street, making sure nobody had followed me. The Suburban and the van had both been absent when I left my apartment, which either meant they were confident I'd comply or they were tracking my car and didn't need visual surveillance anymore. I checked my phone, location services off, airplane mode on. I'd been careful, but careful might not be enough anymore. My parents were asleep. I still had a key from when I'd lived there years ago. I let myself in quietly, went straight to my old bedroom, and opened the closet. Behind a box of high school yearbooks and football trophies was a loose floorboard I discovered when I was 15. I'd hidden things there as a teenager, money I didn't want my parents to know about, letters from a girlfriend, stupid stuff. Now, I was hiding something that could change human history. I pulled up the board and placed one of the encrypted thumb drives in the space beneath, wrapped in plastic, sealed in a small waterproof container. Then I replaced the board, put everything back exactly as it had been, and left the house as silently as I'd entered. My parents would never know I'd been there, and if something happened to me, if I disappeared and never came back, eventually someone might clean out that closet and find what I'd hidden. Or maybe not. Maybe it would sit there for decades, waiting. My second stop was a storage facility on the outskirts of Austin. I'd rented a unit there under a fake name on Saturday, paid cash for 6 months in advance. Inside the 5x5 space was a backpack containing another thumb drive, a detailed written account of everything I'd seen, copies of the photographs printed on photo paper, and the business cards of 3 different journalists with handwritten notes explaining what the materials were and why they mattered. I'd also included a letter to my mother, not explaining everything because she'd never believe it, but telling her I loved her and that if she was reading this, something had gone very wrong. I locked the unit, pocketed the key, and got back in my car. The third location was a safety deposit box at a bank in San Antonio. I'd opened it Friday using my real name, which was risky, but I needed at least one cache that had official documentation proving I'd secured materials before I left Texas. The box contained copies of everything: photos, documents, the handwritten note from the envelope, and a notarized statement describing what I'd found and when. If I disappeared, my lawyer had instructions to access the box and contact specific people. It wasn't a perfect system. There were holes in it, but it was the best I could do with 48 hours of preparation and no resources beyond what I could scramble together myself. By 6 a.m. Monday morning, I was sitting in a Motel 6 outside of Roswell, New Mexico. Yes, Roswell. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd chosen it deliberately. If they were tracking my movements, I wanted them to know I had a sense of humor about this whole thing. Or maybe I was just tired and angry, and the symbolism felt appropriate. I sat on the bed in that cheap room, laptop open, recording this account. Everything I'm telling you now, the archive room, the photographs, the structures on the moon, the men in suits, the impossible choice, all of it documented in my own voice, time-stamped, ready to be uploaded to multiple platforms if I don't check in with my dead man switch system every 72 hours. The dead man switch was crude but effective. I'd set up automated emails through 3 different services, all scheduled to send in 72 hours unless I logged in and reset the timer. The emails went to journalists, bloggers, conspiracy researchers, and even a few mainstream news organizations. Each email contained links to encrypted files stored across multiple cloud services, files that contained the photographs, my testimony, and instructions for verification. If I disappeared, if they decided I was too much of a risk, if I had an accident at their New Mexico facility, the information would spread. Not perfectly, not instantly, but enough that they couldn't contain it. Enough that someone, somewhere would investigate. It was my only leverage, my only guarantee that they'd keep me breathing. I also called my mother. Told her I was taking a new job in New Mexico, exciting opportunity, couldn't talk about the details because of NDAs, but it was good money and a career advancement. She was happy for me. Worried too. Mothers always worry, but mostly happy. I promised I'd call her every Sunday, promised I'd visit for Christmas, promised things I wasn't sure I could keep, and then I told her something that probably sounded strange. Mum, if you don't hear from me for more than 2 weeks, I want you to call this lawyer. I gave her the name and number. Just tell him you haven't heard from me and you're concerned. He'll know what to do. She asked if I was in some kind of trouble. I lied and said no, just being cautious with a new job that involved sensitive work. She accepted that. I hope she never has to make that call. I spent Monday morning preparing myself mentally for what came next. I'd accepted the position. I didn't really have a choice, but I wasn't going in naive. I knew this was a trap, maybe not in the conventional sense. They weren't planning to kill me, at least not immediately, but they were planning to isolate me, control my access to information, monitor my communications, and gradually convert me from a threat to an asset. Or if that didn't work, they'd keep me locked away somewhere I couldn't cause problems. Either way, my life as I knew it was over. Marcus Webb, the NASA archivist, was gone. What came next was something different, someone different. A person who knew things that most of humanity would never know. A person who'd seen proof that we weren't alone. A person who'd been given the choice between comfortable slavery and principled destruction. and chose survival. At 11 a.m., I got a text message from an unknown number. Proceed to coordinates 33.2148 Terre de Guyenne, 106.3261 W. You will be met at the gate. Bring the signed documents, bring nothing else. Welcome to the program. I plugged the coordinates into my GPS. Middle of nowhere, 70 miles north of Alamogordo, in the desert between the San Andres Mountains and the White Sands Missile Range. Of course. Where else would they hide a facility dedicated to studying evidence of extraterrestrial presence? I looked at myself in the motel bathroom mirror. Same face, same Marcus Webb who'd grown up in Tyler, served in the Air Force, worked at NASA, lived a quiet life, but different now, changed, knowing things that separated me from everyone I'd ever known. I loaded my bag into the car, started the engine, and began the drive into the desert toward a facility I'd never heard of, to work on projects I couldn't imagine with people who'd spent decades keeping the biggest secret in human history. I was terrified, angry, excited, resigned, all of it at once. But most of all, I was determined to survive, determined to learn everything I could, and determined that someday, somehow, the truth would come out. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but eventually, because I'd planted seeds, hidden evidence, created systems that would outlive my silence. And if you're hearing this recording, if you're reading this account, it means one of two things. Either I'm dead, or I've decided it's finally time to burn it all down. Either way, the truth is out now. The photographs exist. The structures on the moon are real. And humanity deserves to know what we found up there in 1969, what we've been hiding, and what's still waiting for us in the dust and silence of the lunar surface, patient and eternal and utterly inexplicable. The drive from Roswell took 2 hours. The highway gave way to state roads, then county roads, then dirt tracks that barely qualified as roads at all. My GPS kept recalculating, struggling to maintain a signal as I drove deeper into the desert. The landscape was brutal and beautiful, endless expanses of sand and scrub brush, mountains rising in the distance like ancient teeth, sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. No houses, no gas stations, no signs of human habitation, except for the occasional fence line marking off government property. I passed 3 no trespassing U.S. government property signs before I even got close to the coordinates. This was the middle of nowhere, exactly where you'd hide something you never wanted found. At precisely 33.2148 degree N, 106.326 degree W, there was a gate. Chain link, 12 feet high, topped with razor wire. A simple sign, Auxiliary Research Station 7, authorized personnel only. No other identifying markers. No visible buildings beyond the gate. Just more desert stretching toward low hills, maybe half a mile away. I stopped my car in front of the gate and waited. 30 seconds later, a white pickup truck appeared from behind the hills, kicking up a dust trail as it approached. 2 men in civilian clothes, khakis and polo shirts, like they were heading to a golf course instead of a classified facility. The truck stopped on the opposite side of the gate. One man got out, walked to a control box I hadn't noticed, and punched in a code. The gate began to slide open. He approached my car and I rolled down my window. "Marcus Webb?" he asked, though he clearly knew who I was. "Yes." He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not hostile, not friendly, just resigned, like he'd seen this before. "Follow us. Stay on the marked road. Don't stop. Don't take pictures. Don't deviate from the route. When we get to the facility entrance, park where directed and wait in your vehicle. Someone will come get you." He walked back to his truck without waiting for a response. The gate was fully open now. I took a breath, put my car in gear, and drove through. Behind me, I heard the gate sliding closed with a metallic clang that sounded very final. The road, really just 2 tire tracks in the hard-packed dirt, wound between rocky outcroppings and dry creek beds. We drove for maybe 10 minutes before I saw it. A concrete structure built into the side of a hill, camouflaged so well that if I hadn't been looking for it, I would have driven right past. It looked like a bunker from World War II, all straight lines and reinforced walls, with a massive steel door set into the hillside. The white pickup stopped in a small parking area carved out of the rock. I pulled in next to it and killed my engine. The desert silence was immediate and oppressive. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just the ticking of my cooling engine and the sound of my own breathing. The man who'd spoken to me at the gate walked over. "Documents?" I handed him the signed folder Morrison had left with me. He flipped through it quickly, professionally, then nodded. "Good. Welcome to ARS 7. A few ground rules before we go inside. 1. No personal electronics beyond this point. Your phone, laptop, smartwatch if you have one, anything with a transmitter stays in your car or gets locked in a security locker. 2. Everything you see, hear, and learn from this point forward is classified. You've signed the NDAs. Breaking them is a federal crime with serious consequences. 3. You'll be assigned quarters, a work area, and a handler. The handler will answer questions about facility operations. Don't ask questions about things that aren't directly related to your work. Clear?" I nodded. He gestured toward the steel door. "Then, let's get you processed." The door opened into an elevator shaft. No lobby, no reception area, just a freight elevator big enough to fit a small truck. We descended for what felt like a full minute. I counted the seconds, estimating we were dropping at least 200 feet below the surface. Maybe more. When the doors finally opened, I stepped out into a hallway that could have been in any office building anywhere. Fluorescent lights, white walls, tile floors, the faint hum of ventilation systems. Except office buildings don't exist 200 feet underground in the New Mexico desert. A woman in a lab coat was waiting. She introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Chen, Deputy Director of Operations. She had the same look as Morrison, intelligent, competent, and carrying the weight of knowing things that most people didn't. She walked me through processing, security photos, biometric scans, facility orientation. She showed me my quarters. A small room with a bed, desk, bathroom, and nothing else. No windows, no decorations. Institutional but clean. She showed me the cafeteria, the gym, the common areas where off-duty personnel could relax. Everything underground, everything controlled. Then she took me to what she called the archive, a massive climate-controlled vault filled with filing cabinets, computer servers, and row after row of materials I couldn't identify from the doorway. "This is where you'll work," she said, cataloging, analyzing, and preserving materials related to the Apollo Lunar Anomaly program. You'll receive detailed briefings over the next week. For now, just know that what you saw in those photographs, that's just the beginning. There's 50 years of accumulated data here, and your job is to help us understand it. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. What are the structures? Who built them? How long have they been there? Are they still active? Have we made contact? But I remembered the ground rules. Don't ask questions that aren't directly related to your work. So I just nodded. Dr. Chen studied my face for a moment. "I know this is overwhelming, Marcus. It was overwhelming for all of us when we first learned. But you'll adapt. Everyone does. And eventually you'll understand why we keep this secret, why we have to." She handed me a badge and a tablet. "Your schedule is on the tablet. Report to briefing room 3 at 800 tomorrow. Get some rest. You're going to need it." That was 6 hours ago. I'm sitting in my quarters now recording this final entry. Tomorrow I start learning the truth. The real truth. Not just the fragments I saw in those 23 photographs. Tomorrow I become part of the machinery that keeps humanity in the dark. And I'm terrified of what I'll discover. Terrified of what it means that we found evidence of non-human intelligence on the moon and decided the world couldn't handle it. Terrified of who I'll become after months or years down here, breathing recycled air, surrounded by secrets. But I'm also curious, desperately, painfully curious, because somewhere in this facility is the answer to the biggest question humans have ever asked. Are we alone? And I already know the answer is no. So here's what I need you to know, whoever you are, listening to this. If you're hearing this recording, it means my dead man's switch has been triggered. It means I haven't checked in for 72 hours. It means something went wrong. The photographs I mentioned, the evidence of structures on the lunar surface, they're real. They exist in 3 locations: a storage unit in Austin, Texas, unit number 247 at Secure Store on Highway 183, rented under the name Michael Harris. A safety deposit box at First National Bank in San Antonio, box 1847, registered to Marcus Webb, and hidden in the floor of the bedroom closet at 412 Maple Street, Tyler, Texas, my parents' house. The encryption keys are in this recording's metadata. The passwords are Apollo Truth 1969. I don't know what's going to happen to me. Maybe I'll thrive here. Maybe I'll become one of them, convinced that hiding the truth is the right thing to do. Maybe I'll find a way to expose everything from the inside, or maybe I'll disappear, another casualty of a secret too big to contain. But right now, in this moment, I'm still Marcus Webb. I'm still the guy who believed the public deserves to know, and I'm still willing to risk everything to make sure that someday, somehow, the truth comes out. Check those locations. Verify the photographs, compare them to the public NASA archives. You'll see what I saw, you'll know what I know, and then you'll have to decide what to do with that knowledge. It's 11:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, my 72-hour clock starts. If you're hearing this, the clock ran out. Find the photographs. Tell the story. Make them admit what they found on the moon in 1969. Make them explain why they've been lying for 50 years. Don't let my choice to come here be for nothing. Don't let the truth stay buried. And if anyone from the government contacts you, claiming this is all fabricated, claiming I was mentally unstable, claiming the photographs are fake, ask them this: if it's not real, why did they work so hard to stop me from sharing it? Why did they offer me a job instead of just discrediting me? Why does Auxiliary Research Station 7 exist? The truth is down here, 200 feet below the New Mexico desert. And now it's out there too, hidden in 3 places, waiting for someone brave enough to bring it into the light. God help us all when they do.